My wife and I had a lovely daughter named Emily. She was the best thing in my life, and we enjoyed spending time with her almost every day. Of course, that was before it all began to happen one year. When Emily was 18 or 19 years old, she stopped acting like the Emily that my spouse and I knew, and instead, she became very angry all the time. She would yell and curse at me without cause, and she would spend hours at a time in her room. My spouse and I tried to talk to her, but it seemed to make matters worse. She continued to get worse with time, never eating anything, and never seemed to be content. My wife and I looked everywhere for a solution to help our daughter, Emily, but none of the doctors or specialists we saw could help her. They all said Emily had schizophrenia or some other mental illness, and one doctor even suggested epilepsy, which had no effect at all no matter what kind of medication or treatment they tried. As soon as Emily was taken off of it, she would resume having spasms and anxiety attacks. I had no idea what to do since everything was so awful. One night her spasms got so violent that I had to tie Emily down on her bed so that she wouldn't hurt herself. I ended up making her wear diapers and nursing her like she was in an asylum or something. My wife and I would clean her bed regularly and try to manually feed her. But whenever we got close, she would lash out and spit on us. She would vomit any food that we managed to make her eat back onto us. We didn't know how she would continue to survive in this state. She wasn't eating and she was barely drinking. She would spend the entire day strapped to her bed, screaming and cursing while she struggled to break free. My wife and I were miserable. We would cry together whenever we were away from Emily. We just felt so helpless. We even started sleeping with ears because Emily wouldn't stop screaming throughout the night. I hated hearing you sound like that. She didn't even sound like herself. It was like another voice was coming out of her. Sometimes it even sounded like she was speaking in another language. Had began to think that maybe it wasn't a mental disorder that Emily was suffering from. Weird, horrifying things would happen whenever I was in a room. Sometimes I would hear a voice coming from somewhere other than Emily. Then there would be times where lamps would fall over or other things in her room would be broken, even though she was always tied down. I wasn't a very religious person, but I had come to suspect that Emily could be possessed. Had convinced my wife to let me call local priest to come and perform an exorcism on Emily. I didn't know if I was right, but I was desperate. The priest came over the next day and began the exorcism. It was horrible and loud. Both he and Emily screamed for hours. The priest told me that he believed that Emily was indeed possessed by a demon. He said that he would need continuous time with Emily if he was ever going to be able to help her. It became a daily event for over a week. The priest would come and perform the exorcisms. I would sit in the room's corner and watch, but my wife would stay downstairs. She claimed she couldn't bear to watch and that nothing seemed to be helping. Since the exorcisms began, Emily's behavior had gotten worse. She would lash out even more when the priest wasn't present, and she had become so violent and psychotic that it was difficult to recognize her. It was the worst when the exorcisms actually took place. Her face would turn eerily, her body would twist and rot, she would groan, and she would make strange, non-human noises. I could hardly stand to see her, and I was about to give up, but the priest begged me to allow him to continue because he was so sure he could help her. Emily shot up into the air, her whole body floating over her bed. She then began repeatedly slamming down, all the while yelling something in what sounded like Latin. I started to yell at the priest to stop what he was doing, but Emily leapt out of her restraints and attacked me. I screamed in panic while I tried to fight her off of me. She kept trying to get her hands around my throat so she could strangle me. Finally, the priest was able to rip her off of me, and we managed to get her strapped back down on the bed. I was horrified. The priest told me to leave the room and not come back until he was done. I ran the hell out of there as fast as I could. I found my wife downstairs and told her what had happened. We could still hear the priest continuing the exorcism above us. The power of Christ compels you, be gone. Demon, leave this body behind. We stayed downstairs and cried until it was finally over, and the priest left. He told us that it was far from over after 100 more sessions. Emily was still no better. My wife and I were told to stay out of the room and let the priest work whenever he was there. We lost all hope, but we didn't know what else to do. Emily eventually passed. My wife and I were devastated, and we took out our anger on the priest. He promised to help us, and he failed. We blamed him for what happened. The police ended up looking into the case and arrested the priest for homicide, even though he continued to say that he was only trying to help.